I suspect that what I'm about to share will be something that at least a few of you can relate to pretty directly. Others may think back, oh yeah, I remember that. Maybe there are some who can't relate personally, but I hope you'll get the idea. Every so often, I have the occasion to visit someone. It might be as pastor, visiting a church member, maybe it's visiting with a friend, maybe it's visiting family. And very often when you do that, I can't help but notice how orderly someone else's home looks, how it looks to be. Well, everything looks so nice, like it just fits, it's so organized, everything seems like it has its place, and it just goes together. Not to say that our home is a disorderly place, and if the tables were turned, somebody else might not come in and say, oh boy, look at that, they have things so nicely arranged, everything looks like it fits. But the difference is that at home, I know what is tucked away that the average visitor doesn't see. I know where the closet is, where things are jammed in. I know where the little hidey hole spot is. Oh, company's coming, quick, put that away. I know where the room is that we don't want to open the door. I know what our 2-car garage looks like. I know these things. You see, having served a few churches and a little bit of life before that, we've moved a few times. Actually, we've moved a lot of times. Every time that we do move, inevitably there are some items that don't fit in the new home. We'll be setting things up. We'll be trying to arrange rooms, the kitchen, the dining room, the living room, the bedroom, whatever. And Bonnie will say something like, I know where this lived in the old house. I'm not sure where it's going to live now. And that's code, which basically means, there's no place for this. We need to put it away. And so whether it's into a closet, whether it's into that junk room, whether it's the garage, things get tucked away because we can't figure out the place for them in this new house. Maybe it's a side table, maybe it's a chair. It worked really well there next to the window, but now we don't have that same kind of window, or there's too many doors, there's not enough wall space to hang pictures. Things end up getting put aside because they have no home in the new home. But you don't get rid of them. Stuff accumulates. You don't get rid of them because either they have sentimental value or it might come in handy later. Maybe something changes and we'll use it later on. And sometimes later on, some item or another that has been languishing in a deep, dark hole someplace suddenly finds a purpose. And you think, oh, I've got just the thing for that. And so you go out to the garage, or you go to the back room, or wherever it is, and you pull this item out, and now suddenly this thing that was there, that was languishing, has a purpose. Sometimes, this is really cool when this happens, you go to that dark spot looking for that one particular item that you think will work over here, and while you're there, you see something else, and you say, oh boy, I can use that too. I've been wondering where that was at, and now I can use that over here. Anybody have that experience? There's these things, and they add up, and over time, what do you do with them? I don't want to get rid of it, but I'm not sure what the purpose is. You hope someday you will find a purpose for these things. You hope that you will find the perfect place, the perfect time, the perfect spot for just such a thing. Well, our passage today is taking us to the book of Esther, when Esther finds herself called on for a very special purpose. Out of nowhere, this young girl who had been languishing there as a slave, as a captive in Babylon, out of nowhere, suddenly she finds a great purpose. Before I read our text, let me give you a little background first. If you're not familiar with the book of Esther, Esther tells the story of Jews in captivity in Babylon. The kingdom established under Saul, then passed to David and Solomon, split apart. In the north, there was a succession of worse and worse and worse kings who rebelled from the Davidic rulership. And by this time, when Esther is written, by this time, they'd been defeated by the Assyrians. They essentially were faded away into oblivion. The southern kingdom, which had remained faithful to the descendants of David, finally fell to Babylon, with large numbers of people being deported or being taken captive back to Babylon. As the book of Esther opens up, time has passed, and Nebuchadnezzar, the one who had taken the Jews from the promised land to Babylon, he's no longer king. Now it is King Xerxes. Xerxes is probably the most powerful man in the world at this time. He is used to getting his way in everything. Chapters 1 and 2 in Esther relate how Xerxes was having a celebration to celebrate, well, me. Look at all my kingdom. Look at all my power. Look at me. He had a banquet to celebrate. A banquet that lasted, how's this, Dennis? 180 days. How about that, Steph? You know, we're planning food for a meal. Can you stretch that next week there, Mary? You know, we'll make it a celebration that goes through the entire Christmas season. This banquet was 180 days, and it featured all the luminaries from all over the kingdom. And then when that was finished, to top it all off at the end, he had an even bigger, grander banquet that lasted 7 days on top of that, where he had the highest of the high. He had the most important people from all over the kingdom there to celebrate, well, him. So during this final banquet then, these last few days, Xerxes, full of himself, and as it says in Esther 1:10, in high spirits from wine, ordered his queen to appear in her crown for all to see, so that all could admire her beauty. He essentially is putting her out there as his crowning jewel. The thing is, if you read between the lines in the Hebrew and understand, what Xerxes means by having Queen Vashti come in her crown was that all she was supposed to wear was her crown. When Queen Vashti hears, she refuses. And Xerxes, this king of kings, is enraged, and he deposes her. Can't defy me and get away with that. He deposes her. Later, when he calmed down, he regretted it, but he couldn't go back on his royal command. So he needs a new queen. A decree goes out and a search ensues. Beautiful women from all over the kingdom, all over the empire, were brought to Susa, the capital city, so that they could be pampered and prepared for a time, at which time, when it was completed, the king would look at them all and decide who is the most beautiful, who is the most radiant, who will be queen. Esther, a young Hebrew girl, was one of those who was selected. In the end, it was this young girl who was selected. We have a real rags to riches story. It's a little biblical fairy tale, if you will. And that might have been the end, and we could just have a little Disney princess or something. That might have been the end, but chapter 3 introduces us a villain, one who will be a threat to those Hebrews in captivity. A man by the name of Haman. Haman was high official in Xerxes' court who thought a whole lot of himself. And he got bent out of shape one day from dealings with a Jew by the name of Mordecai. In his arrogance and self-importance, Haman contrives to have all of the Jews not just punished, but eliminated, annihilated from all the provinces of the kingdom. Now, as luck would have it, or better said, with God guiding a bit, Mordecai gets word of the plot. That wouldn't matter. Mordecai is just a Jew in Babylon, and Haman is a high official. It wouldn't matter, except Mordecai just so happens to be uncle to Esther, lately made queen. In a nice little twist, No one in power realized that the new Babylonian queen was really a lowly Jewish foreigner. Doesn't seem like they had their background check system working very well when they were bringing girls from all over the empire to be possibly selected as queen. Chapter 4 tells us what Mordecai did with this knowledge. And this is what I want you to hear. If you have your Bibles open, let's look at chapter 4. When Mordecai learned of all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the city, wailing loudly and bitterly. But he only went as far as the king's gate, because no one clothed in sackcloth was allowed to enter it. In every province to which the edict and order of the king came, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing. Many lay in sackcloth and ashes. When Esther's eunuchs and female attendants came and told her about Mordecai, she was in great distress. She sent clothes for him to put on instead of his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Then Esther summoned Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs assigned to attend her, and ordered him to find out what was troubling Mordecai and why. So Hathach went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate. Mordecai told him everything that had happened to him, including the exact amount of money Haman had promised to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the text of the edict for their annihilation, which had been published in Susa, to show to Esther and explain it to her. And he told him to instruct her to go into the king's presence and beg for mercy and plead with him for her people. Hathach went back and reported to Esther what Mordecai had said. Then she instructed him to say to Mordecai, all the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has but one law, that they be put to death, unless the king extends the gold scepter to them and spares their lives. But 30 days have passed since I was called to go to the king. When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer. Do not think because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai, go, gather together all the Jews who are in Susa, and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. And I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went away and carried out all of Esther's instructions. Before we take a little bit of a closer look, let me just finish the story quickly. Esther does go before King Xerxes, and she does find favor. Does she ask the king to change his mind? You'd think that'd be the wise, the simple, the direct thing to do. No, she asks him to a special private banquet. Just the king and her and Haman. Haman is very flattered to go to a banquet with the king and the queen. After the banquet, the king is pleased and wants to know what he can do to show his favor to Esther. Esther asks them both to come back the next day for another banquet. Finally, after that banquet, in the midst of it, Haman feeling very full of favor. Boy, he is so honored. The king feeling generous. We read in chapter 7, the king and Haman went to Queen Esther's banquet, and as they were drinking wine on the second day, the king again asked, Queen Esther, what is your petition? It will be given you. What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be granted. Then Queen Esther answered, if I have found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life. This is my petition. And spare my people. This is my request. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed and annihilated. If we had merely been sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet, because no such distress would justify disturbing the king. King Xerxes asked Queen Esther, who is he? Where is he? The man who has dared do such a thing? Esther said, an adversary and an enemy, this vile Haman. Longer story short, first of all, Haman is executed. Then as to the edict, while Xerxes cannot undo his edict, he sends out another decree, another edict, which gives the Jews the right to assemble and to defend themselves when the day of the purge comes. They can fight back against anyone. When that day came, they were ready. Chapter 9 tells of the Jews defending themselves, killing hundreds of people in this city, hundreds of people in this town, thousands of people in this town. All told, 75,000 were struck down who rose up against the Jews, and there's no mention of a single Jewish death. It was a stunning turnaround, to say the least. The Jewish people created a whole festival out of this story, Purim, to remember and never forget. Never forget what happened. Never forget their salvation. Well, here today, we find ourselves in the middle of another festival of sorts, a time of special remembrance. It is the season of Advent. Is there anything there in Esther that we can apply here today where we are? I think there are some striking connections between Esther and this season of Advent that we are in. First of all, let's consider the larger context of Esther. Esther and the people of God were living how? Under Babylonian rule. They're living literally apart from their promised land, under Babylonian rule. They're longing for something better. They're longing for God to break in. They're longing for God to change their circumstances, to rescue them from worldly oppression. That sounds pretty similar to where a lot of people feel today, doesn't it? Oh, we may not be physically displaced from our homes like the Hebrews were, but whose rule are we under? In very many ways, what dictates our days is man, not God. In very many ways, what determines what's on our to-do list, what determines our direction, what determines what we need to do, what we need to observe, what we need not to do, is man and not God. And two, what were most people doing while they were living in this situation, while they were under this foreign rule, this oppression? Well, very simply, they were living their lives as best they could. There's no record of freedom fighters or a Jewish resistance to Babylon. The people were largely resigned to their fate. They went about their days as best they could and made the best of it that they could. Again, that doesn't seem very different from what one sees today, even when we consider the church in the world. Most people, despite their faith, don't put up too much of a fuss in regards to the ways of the world. Instead, try to live and let live. Try to maybe put our heads down and do our own thing here. As long as the government, as long as those in authority, as long as the world won't bother us and let us do what we feel led to do, okay. We don't put up too much of a fuss. Rather than standing up, rather than trying to strike something down, rather than trying to make some massive kind of change, most people, despite their faith, just simply try to let things go. We talk about the body of Christ. We talk about the church as a family. But very often, individual believers live, very individually, only coming together for particular and generally agreed upon moments. And then when that moment is up, what do? We go back, we retreat back to our personal, private spaces and just live quietly there and hope that the world doesn't crush us or overwhelm us or give us too much problem. To be fair, to be honest, this is how we find Esther as we enter into the story today. Esther, the queen, the heroine, she didn't stand out. She didn't stand out at all until she was called out. Called out, first of all, to audition to be queen, and then especially when as queen she was called and she stood up. She stood up for her people. Now, at this point, we can all feel very good. Well, there's Esther. Look at her. Look what she did. Yay, Esther. She stood up. We can all feel very good. There's almost a superhero quality about this story. The underdog rising up, inspiring, and look what happened. Let's be sure not to try to neatly put this into a little box. Look at it here as just a simple little story, thinking that we have a handle on it because, the general arc, the plot of this matches up so completely, so perfectly with lots of popular stories and movies that we simply watch or we read and we put back on the shelf. Let's not look at it as a little story to be amused for a little bit and then leave it go and go back to doing whatever we normally do. What Esther did was significant. We need to see it. We need to notice it. We need to think how it impacts us. It was significant. She really did stand up and she risked. She risked not just a lot. Esther risked everything. Everything. If she's not successful, she knows it. If she's not successful, first of all, she's going to die. Secondly, there would go the best, maybe the only hope for her people. What this took, what Esther did, what this took was a dying to self. She had to be willing to put all on the line. Doing so, and with the results that were achieved for the Jewish people, Esther effectively becomes a savior figure, like Moses before her, like judges, like some of the kings, some of the prophets. She gives her life to save her people. Of course, it is God that makes it work, but clearly God is working through here. But today, what I want you to see with Esther is that every act done in service to another is a tiny, or maybe it's a large, dying to self. Every act you perform for someone else is to some degree a dying to self. No matter if the other person is someone you love and you're more than willing to do as you do for them, or whether they are a complete stranger, still every act for another is a sacrifice of self. You could be doing something else. You could be doing anything else, most likely something for yourself. You see what I'm saying? When we really understand Esther and her act, it is remarkable, it is inspiring, and I hope it is instructive as well. Now, maybe she did what she did, feeling a little bit like she had no choice. There's Mordecai pushing her. Come on, Esther, you got to do this. You got to do this. Come on. But still, she did act. She stood up. When there was a choice to be made, she stood up. She took the risk. No doubt Mordecai's words rang in her ears as she was preparing. And who knows that you may have come to your royal position for such a time as this. For such a time as this. These are words that I would have ring in your ears and your heart this Advent season, really all year long. These are words that I would have ring inside of you in this season of waiting, this dark, cold time when it seems that nothing will change. Understand, change is coming, but far too few are really looking for it. Far too few are looking forward to it. Far too few are unaware of it, and they just go about their lives in quiet desperation. Those who are awake to what God will do, what God is doing, have the potential to change the course of lives of people around them. Now, maybe you're not going to change the lives of a whole nation like Esther did. She stood up and it saved an entire people. Maybe you won't save an entire nation, but everyone who recognizes the need of another and chooses to extend themselves for that other person has the potential to give life or add to the life of that other person. Everyone who recognizes the need of another and chooses to stand up and chooses to act has the potential to bless, to increase, to create, to save. Esther is proof that ordinary people can change the world. Esther is proof that you and I can change the world for another, breathing life and hope and joy where there formerly had been none. I'm sure some of you have heard this poem. Howard Thurman, theologian, pastor in the 20th century, wrote a poem you may have heard. I've shared it before, called The Work of Christmas. When the song of the angels is stilled, when the star in the sky is gone, when the kings and the princes are home, when the shepherds are back with their flock, the work of Christmas begins. To find the lost, to heal the broken, to feed the hungry, to release the prisoner, to rebuild the nations, to bring peace among brothers, to make music in the heart. My question today is, why isn't this the work of Advent as well? While we wait on God's timing, while we wait on God to do what God will do, why isn't it our work to do these things now, that those who are lost or who are broken, who are hungry or imprisoned in some way, who lack peace, might be made whole, well, blessed now? Why wait? In truth, thinking about our gospel lesson that Tim read, it's these kinds of acts, reaching out, lending a hand to the lost, the broken, the hungry, the imprisoned. It's these kind of acts that make us light and salt that Jesus said we are meant to be. It is exactly these kind of acts that can change the world and give life. And who knows but that you have come to your present position for such a time as this. Amen. Before we move to our